He controlled billion-dollar mergers with a single phone call, but he couldn't get his own son to eat a single bite. Marcus Whitfield sat rigid in his Italian suit, watching his 8-year-old son, Jamie, rock back and forth in the velvet booth of Leonard. The boy's untouched $200 lobster dish grew cold, while other diners cast judgmental glances their way. Marcus's jaw tightened with each whispered comment, each sideways stare. "Jamie, please," he whispered harshly. "People are watching. Before we go further, hit the like button if you've ever felt unseen while carrying the weight of the world. This story isn't just about autism. It's about love, regret, and the courage to see people for who they truly are." But then something extraordinary happened. A black waitress approached their table with movements so gentle they seemed choreographed by angels. Without a word, she knelt beside Jaime's chair and began humming a soft melody. But what Marcus didn't realize was that she wasn't just any waitress. She was about to teach him what no specialist ever could. Within 3 minutes, the boy who hadn't spoken in 2 years was eating from her hands. Marcus stared in shock. Who was this woman? And how had she done what teams of $500 an hour specialists couldn't? 3 days earlier, the elevator climbed 60 floors in silence. Marcus Whitfield, CEO of Whitfield Industries, stood like a marble statue in his corner office in the sky, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a chessboard he controlled. His empire spanned healthcare, education, and technology, 3 sectors that touched millions of lives. Yet the one life that mattered most remained unreachable. His assistant knocked softly. "Mr. Whitfield, the car's ready for your dinner with Jamie." Marcus closed his eyes. Another obligatory father-son meal. Another evening of sitting across from a child who lived in a world Marcus couldn't enter. Across town, Kesha Williams tied her apron strings in the cramped employee break room of Leonard. At 32, she moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to carry burdens silently. Her hands bore the calluses of double shifts, but her eyes held something money couldn't buy, a depth of understanding that came from loving the overlooked. She checked her reflection in the cracked mirror. 10 years ago, those same hands had guided 20 special needs children through breakthrough moments. 10 years ago, she'd believed education could change the world. Now, she carried plates and swallowed pride, one table at a time. Meanwhile, 8-year-old Jamie Whitfield sat in the back seat of a Mercedes, his small hands tracing patterns on the window. The city lights blurred past like stars he could never touch. He lived in a mansion with 17 rooms, yet spent most of his time in one, his bedroom, where the world felt manageable and sounds didn't hurt. The evening started predictably. Marcus and Jamie sat in their reserved corner booth, the boy immediately covering his ears at the restaurant's gentle jazz piano. Marcus ordered for both of them, speaking in the clipped tones of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "The usual for the child," he told Kesha curtly, not looking up from his phone. "And make sure it's not too hot. He's particular." Kesha nodded, but her trained eyes were studying Jaime. She recognized the telltale signs, the sensory overload, the retreat inward, the way his small body curled like a question mark seeking an answer. When the food arrived, the familiar dance began. Marcus Cajole bargained, threatened softly. Jaime rocked and hummed, lost in his private world. Other diners whispered and stared. Then Kesha did something that changed everything. She knelt beside Jaime's chair, not towering over him like the adults in his life, but meeting him at eye level. She began humming a melody so soft it felt like a lullaby wrapped in starlight. It was Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, but arranged in minor keys that somehow matched the rhythm of Jaime's rocking. The boy's hands stilled. His eyes, usually darting everywhere except toward faces, found hers. Without breaking the melody, Kesha picked up a small piece of lobster and moved it in gentle circles. The same pattern Jaime had been tracing on the table. She made the food dance, turning dinner into a quiet ballet only he could see. Jaime leaned forward. Then, miracle of miracles, he opened his mouth. Marcus watched in stunned silence as his son ate bite after bite, his small body relaxing for the first time in months. He didn't say thank you, but the look on his face said something was beginning. 10 years earlier, Kesha stood before her classroom of 15 special needs children, her heart full of possibility. The Riverside Learning Center was her sanctuary, a place where different minds weren't deficits to fix, but gifts to unwrap. Remember, she told her aide, they're not broken. They just speak a different language. Our job is to learn it. 8-year-old Marcus Jr. from the wealthy district would have thrived here, but Kesha didn't know that then. She only knew that love and patience could unlock any door. 5 years earlier, Marcus sat in a boardroom reviewing quarterly reports with surgical precision. The education division showed declining profits. "Cut the special needs programs," he dictated to his team. "They're not cost-effective. Focus resources on mainstream initiatives." He signed the papers with the same hand that would later struggle to feed his own son. The irony was lost on him. Then 2 years earlier, Jaime's first diagnosis appointment. Marcus sat across from Dr. Hendricks. The words autism spectrum disorder echoing in the sterile room like a death sentence. "He'll need specialized care," the doctor explained gently. "There are wonderful programs available, but unfortunately, many have lost funding recently." Marcus barely heard the rest. His empire was crumbling in the space of his son's silence. Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself requesting Kesha's section every time he brought Jaime to dinner. The boy, who couldn't sit still for 5 minutes at home, would spend hours peacefully eating under her gentle guidance. She taught Marcus small things: how to dim his phone screen so it wouldn't flicker, how to speak in lower tones, how to approach Jaime from the side rather than head-on. Each lesson felt like learning a new language, one his money couldn't translate. "You're good with him," Marcus admitted one evening, his usual arrogance replaced by something raw. "Where did you learn?" "Practice," Kesha replied simply, refilling his water glass. But something in her voice suggested volumes left unspoken. Marcus began arriving early, staying late. Other patrons complained about the disruption of Jaime's presence. But Kesha always seated them in her quietest corner, creating a bubble of peace in the chaos. Then the complications began. Restaurant management questioned why their most exclusive waitress was spending so much time with one difficult child. Gossip magazines caught wind of the billionaire CEO's special friendship with a server. The headlines were cruel. Whitfield's waitress whisperer and when money can't buy parenting. But the real threat came from an unexpected source. Margaret Sinclair, Marcus's former wife and Jaime's mother, read the tabloid stories from her penthouse in Monaco. She'd abandoned her family 2 years prior when Jaime's diagnosis made their picture-perfect life inconvenient. Now she saw an opportunity. Inappropriate relationship with service staff, she declared to her lawyer over champagne. "Clearly an unfit environment for our son. I want custody." The evening, everything changed, began like all the others. Kesha approached their table with her usual gentle smile, but Marcus noticed something different. A heaviness in her step, shadows beneath her eyes. As she helped Jaime with his dinner, the boy did something unprecedented. He reached out and touched her hand. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, he spoke his first words in 2 years. "Mama Kesha, hungry?" The words hung in the air like a prayer answered. Kesha's eyes filled with tears she couldn't hide. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. A wall he'd built so high he'd forgotten what lay behind it. "She's not just hungry," Marcus said quietly, his voice thick with realization. "She's been taking care of everyone but herself." For the first time, they truly saw each other. Not billionaire and waitress, not white and black, not powerful and powerless, just two people who love the same remarkable child. "Tell me about yourself," Marcus said. And for once, it wasn't a command. It was a plea. The custody papers arrived on a Tuesday morning along with paparazzi photos of Marcus, Jaime, and Kesha sharing what looked like an intimate family dinner. Margaret's lawyers painted a picture of instability, inappropriate boundaries, and a father so desperate he'd outsource parenting to restaurant staff. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. But Marcus wasn't just walking into a legal battle. He was about to face the cost of a system he helped break. His legal team was confident but concerned. "They'll try to make this about race and class," his lead attorney warned. "They'll say you're exploiting this woman, using her as unpaid childcare. You need to distance yourself." But Marcus couldn't distance himself, not from the woman who'd given him his son back. The media circus was brutal. Reporters camped outside Lernarden, turning Kesha's workplace into a fishbowl. She was forced to take unpaid leave as the restaurant tried to manage the scandal. For the first time in years, Marcus couldn't sleep. Jaime, sensing the adult's distress, retreated deeper into his shell. Without Kesha's calming presence, the boy stopped eating again. The morning of the boy stopped eating again. The morning of the custody hearing, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He called Kesha. "I need you to testify," he said. I need you to tell them who you really are." The courtroom was packed with reporters and curious onlookers. Margaret sat primly in the front row, her designer suit and perfect makeup, a stark contrast to Kesha's simple black dress and nervous hands. Margaret's attorney painted Kesha as an opportunistic gold digger who manipulated a vulnerable child for financial gain. The testimony was vicious, designed to humiliate and destroy. Then it was Kesha's turn to speak. She walked to the witness stand with quiet dignity, her hands steady despite the cameras flashing like lightning around her. "Tell us about your relationship with the defendant and his son," Margaret's lawyer demanded. Kesha looked directly at Marcus, then at Jaime sitting in the gallery, then back at the courtroom full of strangers judging her life. "My name is Kesha Williams," she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I have a master's degree in special education from Columbia University. For 8 years, I ran the Riverside Learning Center, where I helped over 200 children with autism, ADHD, and developmental delays learn to communicate, to trust, to believe in themselves." The courtroom grew quiet. "I lost that job when my program lost funding. The company that pulled that funding was Whitfield Industries. Mr. Whitfield's company eliminated the very services his son needed. Services I spent my life providing." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "So yes," Kesha continued, her voice now ringing with quiet power. "I know how to help Jaime eat. I know how to make him feel safe. Because I spent 8 years learning that children like Jaime aren't broken. They're just ignored. And when the world stopped paying me to love them, I kept loving them anyway. One table, one shift, one moment at a time." She turned to face Margaret directly. "You want to know why Jaime calls me Mama Kesha? Because I'm the first person in his life who saw him as a gift instead of a burden. Not because I was paid to, but because that's what love looks like when it's real. If this part hit you deep, consider subscribing. These are the stories we don't see enough. The ones where dignity wins and love quietly rewrites every rule." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for quotes. Margaret's perfect composure cracked, but Marcus only heard one thing, the sound of his own heart breaking open. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. Jaime would remain with his father, but with conditions, family therapy, autism support services, and a formal care plan developed by qualified professionals. Outside the courthouse, Marcus found Kesha sitting alone on the steps, exhausted by the day's emotional toll. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling inadequate. "I'm sorry for what my company did. I'm sorry for what I took from you, from all those children. I'm sorry it took losing my own son's trust to understand what I destroyed, for a man who once signed away 100 lives with a single stroke." This apology carried the weight of 1,000 regrets. Kesha looked up at him, this man who'd controlled her fate without knowing her name. "Your apology doesn't give me back 8 years, she said quietly. "But it's a start." Marcus sat beside her on the cold stone steps, his expensive suit wrinkling against the concrete. "I want to hire you," he said, "not as a waitress. As director of the new Whitfield Foundation for Neurodevelopmental Support. Full control, unlimited budget. Your vision?" Kesha studied his face, searching for manipulation or pity. She found neither. Why? Because Jaime isn't the only child like him, and you're not the only person like you. The world needs what you have to give. That evening, in the quiet of Marcus's penthouse, something magical happened. Kesha prepared Jaime's dinner with the same gentle movements she'd used at the restaurant. But this time, Marcus watched and learned. He practiced her soft humming, her patient approach, her way of seeing his son as perfect exactly as he was. Jaime ate from both their hands, his small body relaxed and trusting. For the first time since his diagnosis, he looked like what he'd always been. Not a broken child in need of fixing, but a beautiful soul speaking his own language. Marcus felt tears on his cheeks, the first he'd shed since his divorce. "You brought me back to my heart," he whispered to Kesha as they watched Jaime play contentedly with his food, making patterns only he could see. "No," she replied, her hand finding his across the table. "You just finally learned to listen." 6 months later, the Whitfield Foundation opened its doors in the same building that once housed Riverside Learning Center. Kesha stood in the main classroom, surrounded by 15 children whose laughter filled the space like music. Marcus arrived for his weekly visit with Jaime, but his son no longer needed coaxing to stay. This was his sanctuary now, a place where his differences were gifts, where his silence spoke volumes, where love came without conditions. In the corner, a small plaque read, "In memory of all the children we forgot to see, and in honor of those who saw them anyway." Kesha had framed her first paycheck from the foundation, not because of the amount, but because of the memo line Marcus had written in his own hand for services already rendered with profound gratitude. But the real transformation lived in smaller moments. Marcus humming softly when Jaime felt overwhelmed. The boy reaching for his father's hand without prompting. A family learning to speak the same language of love. As the afternoon light filtered through the classroom windows, painting everything in gold, Jaime looked up from his art project. A drawing of 3 figures holding hands under a sky full of stars. "Mama Keisha," he said clearly, his voice stronger now. "Daddy Jamie family. If you believe every child deserves to be seen, share this story with someone who needs it, and follow for more stories that remind us what real love looks like." Marcus knelt beside his son, his heart so full it ached. "Yes," he whispered. "Family." Kesha smiled from across the room, surrounded by children who would never again be overlooked, ignored, or forgotten. She'd learned something profound in her journey from waitress to director. Sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin with the simple act of seeing someone truly. She wasn't hired to change their lives. She just refused to walk away. And in that refusal, in that stubborn insistence on love over profit, recognition over ignorance, she'd saved more than one billionaire's son. She'd held up a mirror to a man's soul and shown him what he'd been missing all along. Sometimes the person you ignore is the one holding the key to everything you've been searching for.